Now, I've received a critique of my concept to replace borrowed power, and it was actually a pretty logical critique. I pushed back on it after I first read it, but after some reflection, I realized my critic had better points than I was giving him credit for. You see, the glory days of Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria that I keep hearkening back to did have some problems. As good as class design was then compared to now, there were issues with progression and content that did hurt the game. In Cataclysm, it was easy to run out of things to do. I ran out of things to do once I maxed out my reputations and professions and got geared to the point where I was up to snuff for raiding. I basically only logged into raid at that point. Mists began the process of putting systems in place to encourage players to keep logging in, what with half-hill farm and really long reputation grinds. Of course, those reputation grinds had their own issues since people in raiding guilds felt obliged to push through those long reputation grinds to get the gear that was walled behind exalted reputations. Neither one of these expansions had anything like Azurite, Artifact Power, or Anima, currencies that you grind for at maximum level to continue to unlock perks. Those currency grinds do keep players logging in for longer and encourage them to go out and do content to earn those currencies. And Blizzard might feel a need to keep a system in the game that ties these kinds of currencies to player power. They might reject any idea that lacks such a long-haul currency grind. Just like I'd reject an expansion that doesn't unprune Holy Radiance and Denounce. The difference is Blizzard actually controls the game. Now, I've thought a lot about this, and I've concluded that it's not the currency grinds that are the problem. It's not even the systems themselves. It's not that we have to work for good things and perks and player power. The problems are that borrowed power has been papering over class design issues. It's encouraged the development of complex systems that all too often work against themselves, and it's the emotional impact of the fact that the stuff that we get that adds fun to the game and changes how we play either disappears at the end of an expansion or gets turned into talents that we, annoyingly enough, have to spend talent points in order to get back after we've lost them. We got it for free last year and have to pay for it this year. This is not a good business model. Hint, hint. So, considering that Blizzard probably wants some kind of currency system in place, I think I need to revise at least part of my borrowed power replacement idea so that it has a currency and purchased perks system. Some of you are groaning at the very word system at this point, but hear me out. If this system does not paper over class design issues, if this system is kept simple so that it won't work against itself or against the players or against its basic intended purpose, and if the system doesn't slam us with the emotional impact of losing stuff at the expansion's end, then it can actually be a good system while still incorporating a currency like Anima or Artifact Power. Now, if you haven't seen my video about my concept for Slotted Swappable Upgrade Abilities, you should probably go and watch that video first. There's a link in the description, and if you haven't seen that video, this one probably won't make any sense to you. The link will take you straight to the part of my video that explains the concept. Most of the rest of that video is context for why I want to get rid of borrowed power. With that out of the way, first of all, I'd like to say that in this revised concept, getting new abilities and getting replacement abilities is still something that happens while you're leveling up from 61 to 70. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those upgrade abilities are complete the moment you get them. I.e., it doesn't mean that those upgrade abilities already do everything they'll ever be able to do right when you get them. For example, remember my prismatic spray suggestion for mages? Imagine if getting it at level 61 still gives you an ability that's available if your frost spells get interrupted because it deals prismatic damage instead of frost damage, and it deals a bit more damage than Cone of Cold, which I notice isn't even mentioned on Icy Veins' Frost Mage rotation page. You'd think they'd at least mention that you can use it while moving or something. But anyway, there's no reason why Prismatic Spray needs to have a chance to cast all those extra effects right then and there at level 61. It's okay for some of those extra effects to be available at level 61, and some not to be available yet. Then, when you're at level 60 and are earning ability power points from doing world quests and whatnot, you can spend some ability power points to upgrade Prismatic Spray to add Fire Blast, Frostbolt, and Frostjaw to its random possible extra casts, one by one, as you gain more ability power points and spend them. Not all of the long-haul system currencies need to start with A, of course. But, well, we got something going, so we might as well keep rolling with it. Of course, I ended up creating a complete progression for my own spec, the Holy Paladin, and looking at the first draft of this progression, it's got a serious problem. But I'll just continue talking about my first draft because that first draft does a good job of illustrating the basic concept of ability power. Plus, the serious problem is actually pretty easy to fix. And the fix also does a good job of illustrating what isn't the problem with borrowed power. That's kind of cryptic, but trust me, you'll see what I mean by that by the time this video is over, so let's get moving with it. Now, the abilities that I created upgrades for are Judgment, Flash of Light, Rebuke, Consecration, and Denounce. And in retrospect, I should have chosen more healing spells, which I guess feeds into the serious problem I was talking about earlier, but I digress. I picked abilities that could be upgraded and what they can be upgraded to based on the following. Number 1, how cool would it look to actually do that? Visuals are important. We human beings are a visual species. Besides, I think there are some underutilized character animations in this game, like the kick animation and the throw animation. If our abilities can make use of those, so much the better. And number 2, would it be fun and fitting as an addition to our kit? Would its effects be useful? Based on those criteria, I created the following 6 upgrade abilities. First of all, Judgment can be upgraded to Fist of the Heavens. A classic Diablo 2 spell for paladins, this calls down a bolt of lightning onto an enemy and launches some sparks out. In this case, the orangey gold bolt from above deals light storm damage, and then 2 holy sparks jump out, randomly targeting either an ally or an enemy close to your intended target. It'll heal an ally or damage an enemy. While it might be a little redundant with Holy Prism, I don't care. It would just look so awesome that I just don't care. Flash of Light can be upgraded to Natural Light, which is almost identical except its cast time is a tiny bit shorter, and it's technically a Nature School spell. So if Holy Light or Denounce gets interrupted, hey, you can still cast heals. Now, I've got no idea if this is overpowered or useless, but hey, it's a first draft anyway. Natural Light will also gain a bit more benefit from your mastery to make its healing per second even higher, but I'll explain more about that later. Denounce can be upgraded to Hammer of the Crusader, which looks like Hammer of Wrath did during Vanilla. I absolutely loved how that hammer just crackled with electricity in my hand while I was charging up to throw it. And I really miss that visual. Hammer of the Crusader brings that back. And it also brings back the perk that Judgment of the Crusader did, in that Hammer of the Crusader applies a stacking debuff to the target that makes it take up to 5% more holy damage at first. It can be upgraded to 10% with ability power. Again, more on that later. Consecration can be upgraded to an ability taken straight from the Herja fight in Legion. Sanctification. It creates a pillar of light that randomly fires out holy bolts at nearby enemies. These bolts can pass through multiple enemies, and the pillar lasts as long as Consecration does. And any effects that you get from standing in your Consecration, you instead get from being close enough to the pillar. Rebuke actually has 2 different upgrades. One of them is a kick called Caliga, named after a Roman soldier's sandal or boot, and that one has a shorter cooldown, and once it's been upgraded, it can silence enemies for a few seconds. The other upgrade is a ranged interrupt ability called Objection. Now for how these upgrades can be further boosted using the ability power perk system. First of all, The ability power perk system is actually quite a bit like the artifact weapon system in that you can get all the perks in the UI. There's no mutually exclusive decisions to make. I'm keeping it simple to keep that nasty complexity at bay. Now granted, since some abilities are mutually exclusive, like Caliga and Objection, you can't benefit from all the perks at the same time, but you can get them all. It's just a choice of where you spend your ability power first. Secondly, ability power doesn't get you new upgrade abilities. Leveling up from 61 to 70 gets you those. Ability power just makes those upgrade abilities even better. Third, there's no reason why ability power couldn't also make other abilities better, i.e. abilities that aren't upgrade abilities. Nor is there any reason why ability power couldn't provide nifty passives for you that aren't an inherent part of active abilities. For example, I have about 10 different things that you could spend ability power on in this first draft. Each one of them has 5 ranks. Once you get enough ability power, you unlock another rank of a perk in the UI. And much like the artifact power in Legion, each perk that you unlock is more expensive than the last one, which helps keep the system going. And again, like artifact power, once you unlock all the regular perks, a new perk opens up as a kind of a capstone for the whole system. One of the perks is called Righteous Indignation, which improves Fist of the Heavens. The more ranks of Righteous Indignation that you unlock, the more sparks fly out when Fist of Heavens damages a target. You can rank up this perk 5 times and get 5 extra sparks that fly out when Fist of the Heavens damages an enemy, for 7 sparks total. Another perk is Order in the Court, which buffs Objection. Objection starts out with a 20-yard range, but once you've gotten all 5 ranks of the Order in the Court perk, Objection's range is up to 40 yards. But not all of these affect upgrade abilities. Holy Radiance is another ability which I'm assuming is in my kit that isn't attached to the upgrade system. Not everything that's new and exciting for the spec needs to be in the next expansion's newfangled player power system. Hint, hint. And it gets buffed by this perk called Change of Venue. Yeah, I'm still using legal terms for these. And that perk boosts my movement speed while I'm channeling Holy Radiance. That's right. When I first log in during the next expansion and get delighted to see Holy Radiance on my spell bar, I don't get the boosted movement speed right away. I gotta wait for maximum level, and then I have to earn and spend ability power to get that boosted movement speed. But it's still awesome. There are others, like Contempt of Court, that once you've spent ability power on it 5 times, takes the Hammer of the Crusader debuff and causes it to increase holy damage by 10% instead of by 5% once there are 5 stacks of the debuff on the enemy. Or the Hallowed Ground perk, which makes Sanctification send out more bolts over its duration. Or Angelic Tread, which is what adds the silence duration to Caliga so that your interrupt silences the enemy for 3 seconds once it's at rank 5. Or Indictment, which causes your Denounce or Hammer of the Crusader to reduce the critical damage and healing of your target by half. That's meant to be a revival of Denounce's old debuff that doesn't out-and-out prevent crits, but that keeps them from doing any more damage or healing than they'd otherwise do. But anyway, another perk is Daybreak, a passive from Cataclysm that really should make a comeback, since Holy needs another proc or 2 to make things interesting. Once Daybreak is fully upgraded, Holy Light and Flash of Light, and Natural Light for that matter, have a 20% chance to cause your next Holy Shock not to incur its cooldown. We got that in Cataclysm when Holy Shock's cooldown was 6 seconds. It would be an even bigger game changer with Holy Shock's even longer cooldown these days. The last one, before the capstone, is called Anshay's Embrace, a perk that buffs Natural Light, causing it to get extra benefits from our mastery. Keep in mind, the mastery is that we heal for more when we're nearer to our healing target. That mixes in some Tauren lore about the light. The capstone perk is called Piety, and that increases our critical strike chance by 5% after we've ranked it up 5 times. You get the general idea, but there's something I noticed after I was done with all of this. Only about half the perks in this ability power UI even help with healing. And that's being generous with my definition of help with healing for righteous indignation and change of venue. Compare that to our artifact weapons, which started at 18 perks, and 14 of those helped with healing. When you look at it that way, I really screwed up with this UI. Most of these perks really should be about healing, since we're talking about a healing spec. And even worse than that, if a Blizzard employee is watching this right now, they are going to get exactly the wrong impression about what my overall feeling is about my spec. By looking at this ability power progression UI and seeing mostly utility and damage buffs, they'll probably think, this veteran Hurley Paladin isn't putting in very many buffs to healing in his dream system. So that can only mean one thing. Whatever he might say, what he really thinks deep down is that his healing kit is all good. Whatever he might say, he really knows deep down in his heart of hearts that we did an excellent job and that his spec doesn't need to change. Here's the thing, though. This whole setup that I'm talking about actually makes a few sizable changes to my healing kit. It just doesn't do all the changing through this ability power perk system. I mean, one big change is through the perk system. Daybreak's return is totally through the ability power system. But the changes I'm putting on display also involve getting Holy Radiance, Denounce, and Rebuke back. The ability power system simply isn't the thing that puts those 3 unpruned abilities back on my spell bar. I mean, once they're on my spell bar, the ability power perk system enhances them. But the ability power system doesn't put them there. The fact is that I'm really missing Holy Radiance, and I think Light of the Martyr is pretty useless. I want to see Holy Radiance replace Light of the Martyr, and I really don't see any reason to have that replacement have anything to do with the newfangled player power system of the next expansion. If I just had Holy Radiance back, then I think my healing kit would be pretty close to perfect. If I had Denounce back, my damage kit would be vastly improved. If I had Rebuke back, it would be a big quality of life improvement and a utility buff. And again, I see no reason those abilities' returns should need to be part of the newfangled player power system in the next expansion. The fact is, I'd like a player power system that makes awesome things better rather than papering over class design issues. What I want is a player power system that builds on top of a foundation of pre-existing awesomeness, rather than attempting to be a tower of awesome built upon a foundation of suckiness. And I think that re-adding Holy Radiance, Denounce, and Rebuke will establish that foundation of pre-existing awesomeness. I don't think that foundation has yet been established, at least not for my spec. All this being said, the Ability Power Perks UI, as shown here, sucks. By all rights, it should be more about healing and less about damage and utility, at least in terms of the sheer percentage of options for what to spend ability power on. But the solution is both easy and very illustrative of what isn't a problem with borrowed power. There's no reason there can't be a bunch of no-brainer perks that slightly increase the power of our other abilities. Just take the 5-point perks I have here, make them 3-pointers or 2-pointers instead, and redistribute those points to basic and obvious perks. For example, Improved Holy Light, which cuts Holy Light's mana cost by 2%. Or Improved Flash of Light that boosts Flash of Light's and Natural Light's healing by 2%. Light of Dawn, Word of Glory, Lay on Hands, Aura Mastery, Holy Shock, any of these can be given a perk or two. Those kinds of perks were all over the place on our artifact weapons in Legion. Add a bunch of those and suddenly this looks a lot more like a sensibly designed healer's ability perk UI than my first draft did. But now, remember how I said this was illustrative of what isn't a problem with borrowed power? Imagine if some of these perks stuck with us going into the expansion after the next one, such as Change of Venue speeding us up while channeling Holy Radiance, or Daybreak being a permanent fixture of Holy's rotation. Those wouldn't need to have anything to do with this ability power perk UI once they carry over into the expansion after the next one. They'd just plain become an inherent part of our class once the next expansion closes and the one after that begins. Either they'd be automatic passives like Infusion of Light, or their benefits would get baked into our spells and upgrade abilities. But imagine if other perks from this UI, like Improved Holy Light or Piety, did disappear. No one would shed a tear over those little no-brainer perks going bye-bye, because those don't affect how we play. That doesn't change the fact that it'll still be worth it to spend ability power on those soon-to-be vanishing perks while we're leveling up in the expansion where the ability perk UI gets introduced. But they still wouldn't be missed after the expansion's end. It's the stuff that does change how we play, like new abilities and game-changing passives, that we want to stick around, preferably without having to spend talent points on them. Hint, hint. If those kinds of things did stick around, and a bunch of obvious little no-brainer perks didn't, that would actually be the perfect borrowed power system. And we can have another borrowed power system in the subsequent expansion with its own long-haul currency and extremely similar perks in it, and people will probably be fine with it. It might feel like a lack of creativity unless they shuffle around which abilities get grouped together in the perks and give them new names, but losing the old perks in favor of the new ones won't be painful. I mean, remember the problems I listed with borrowed power from my earlier video, in no particular order: papering over class design issues, the emotional impact of having fewer capabilities this year than last year, and of having your specs design broken when you lose your borrowed power at the end of the expansion, and encouraging complexity in systems that end up working against the player, working against the systems themselves, working against the system's intended purpose, and or devouring developer time to balance. This borrowed power system doesn't have any of those issues. All the capabilities stick around. The ability power perks that improve the upgrade abilities will get baked into those upgrade abilities when the next expansion rolls around. It's the little things like number tweaks to already existing capabilities that disappear. And we can part with those without hitting that bad emotional impact, and without breaking any classes. The complexity isn't there because decisions that block off some perks in favor of others are few and far between. And the way it's designed doesn't paper over class design issues. First, those issues get solved at the baseline by unpruning the right spells, and then the ability power system builds on top of those. Actually, the ability power system builds on them quite a bit when I look at it. On top of that, the fact that there's slotted swappable upgrade abilities that are sticking around after the expansion's end means that spell bar bloat also won't be an issue, even though we've gotten 6 or 7 new abilities that we did not have before. We simply don't have more abilities on our spell bars at any one time than we did in Shadowlands, except for the unpruned abilities. On the subject of slotted swappable upgrade abilities, I made a big mistake with those, just like I did with the ability power perks. At least half of those upgrade abilities should be upgrades to heals. And of the 5 upgraded abilities, only 1 was a heal. 1! I figure I should explain how I ended up falling into that particular trap. One thing that I had wanted to avoid was adding must-have abilities. I mean, must-have talents are a really bad thing that just ends up being merged into the player's baseline kit anyway. So I figured that adding heal upgrades would produce some must-have upgrade abilities, and upgrade abilities that are must-haves would probably be bad. And secondly, one of my biggest criteria for picking which abilities to upgrade was, how cool would each concept look and feel? Sanctification is a cool concept, even if it's basically consecration all over again. That's why I added it, though I have to admit 2 things. Number 1, it would be okay if Sanctification were a protection-only upgrade ability, and number 2, it would also be okay if Sanctification started out as a protection-only, and then became a possible upgrade for Holy later in the expansion, or maybe in the expansion after the next. I mean, expanding which specs can get stuff can be exciting. Just look at me pining for Consecration for 2 whole expansions and then getting it in Legion. That's also why I added 2 different upgrades for Rebuke in my first draft. I thought the kick animation was underused, and briefly during Cataclysm when Rebuke was first added to my spell bar, Rebuke did use the kick animation in spite of the fact that it had a fist for its icon. I thought that was actually really cool, and the sheer fact that it was a kick animation really added to the feel of what I could do as a paladin. The whole point of Caliga was that I'd hoped to get a kickback. I sure hope no one takes that out of context. Anyhow, the reason why I wanted to kick on my spell bar again was because I think the kick animation is a cool and underutilized animation. Just like I still have Hammer of the Crusader because I like the holding an item animation. If I had to do this all over again to add more upgradable healing abilities, here's what I'd do. First of all, I would have it set up so that you can swap upgrade abilities anytime you're out of combat. That way, must-haves for healing wouldn't be competing so much with damage or utility upgrades, because anytime you need damage or utility for soloing, you can swap out a healing ability or 3 for whatever other upgrades you need. And you can switch back as soon as the need for heals arises again if you're out of combat. Now, Blizzard has a very sad tendency to overthink things when it comes to swapping out stuff like upgrade abilities or conduits or Heart of Azeroth essences. They make you go all the way back to your base, fiddle with an altar or an NPC or a UI, and then go all the way back to the world to actually try those tricks in real content. Personally, I don't see any real reason why upgrade abilities need to be that inconvenient. Why not just let us swap them like talents, only do so anytime we're out of combat? Of course, if it were that convenient to swap out upgrade abilities, it would be almost like you've got more abilities on your spell bar. And in my opinion, that's a very good thing. And indeed, that level of convenience practically negates the problems with must-have upgrade abilities. They're only must-haves in specific situations, and you can swap them out quickly and efficiently and conveniently if you have just a little time to prepare, which you usually will. And you don't even have to take yourself away from the content to do so. With that foundation of convenience and awesomeness well established, it is now safe to build on top of that foundation of convenience and awesomeness and add some heal upgrades without fear of must-haves, because must-haves have ceased to be a problem. But to make room for those heal upgrades, Caliga would probably get merged into Objection if not removed altogether. Sanctification would be set aside as a protection-specific ability, as sad as I am to see it go, and in place of these, well, there's a few possibilities. For example, one of the concepts that I had as I was making this video but did not actually include in my first draft of the video was Divine Shock. Obviously that's an upgrade for Holy Shock, and originally it was intended to be the way that we get Daybreak back in our kits. But it sounded too much like a must-have to me. However, once we're in a position where it's okay to have must-have upgrade abilities, then it becomes okay for Divine Shock to be in the picture again. I would give it a 10% chance for Holy Light, Natural Light, and Flash of Light to proc it when we first get it while soloing. Then, that chance goes up to 20% through ability power perks. Another concept is Word of Light, which is an upgrade for Word of Glory. It's a channeled heal, and again, the reason I'm coming up with it is because we've seen NPCs using some pretty snazzy-looking channeled light effects. And really, I don't see any reason to keep those snazzy-looking animations out of players' hands. It consumes holy power over time, and you cannot move while channeling this one, but the longer you channel, the more it heals per tick. The perk system would enable it to consume up to 5 holy power. Just to make this ability interesting, I'd like it if it could also be cast on enemies to damage them. The third concept is Light Orb, which is an upgrade for Light of Dawn that's kind of like Frozen Orb in reverse. An orb of light projectile that heals allies over time. It would take longer for the healing to reach your targets, but the overall healing amount would be more than it would be from Light of Dawn. I can't think of any non-trivial ways to buff Light Orb via the ability power perk system, but then again, I can't think of a reason why every upgrade ability needs to have non-trivial buffs in the perk system. You know, if I'm being honest, the biggest reason why I'm adding a currency system to my upgrade ability concept isn't because I particularly want a currency system. It's because, well, I figure companies send their employees to online forums to see what their customers are saying about their products and services. The kind of critique that I got on Reddit sounded like one from a Blizzard employee. Even if this isn't a Blizzard employee who critiqued it, the discussion did give me the impression that Blizzard wouldn't be willing to consider a new player power system that doesn't have some kind of long-haul currency like anima or artifact power that we grind for once we reach max level. So, modifying the slotted upgrade concept so that it has such a currency system seems like a good idea to me, as long as we evade the issues that borrowed power has had in the past with papering over class design issues, encouraging complexity, and hurting the experience when the borrowed power gets taken away. Plus, I think this video illustrates exactly what the problem isn't when it comes to borrowed power. There are bits and pieces of borrowed power that can go away at an expansion's end without hurting the experience. And that is worth pointing out even and especially to borrowed power's critics. So I figured it would be good to create another video breaking all of this down. Thank you for watching, and please let me know what you think.